At 00:15 hours on November 14th, 2025, the waters of the Nova Rosisk Gulf were calm, almost deceptive in their stillness. On the shores, Russian sentries patrolled as usual, their routines familiar and predictable. They had no idea the coming hours would redefine the notion of untouchable. Hidden among the shadows of the port infrastructure, Ukrainian operators prepared for a strike that had been months in planning. The target was monumental, Nova Rosisk, the linchpin of Russia's Black Sea operations, valued at more than $10 billion. In the Odessa region, 600 kilometers away, a camouflaged transporter waited beneath the cover of pine trees. Its cargo was 4 long Neptune cruise missiles, each armed with 249 kilograms of explosives. They sat in vertical launch tubes, sleek and silent, like instruments of impending chaos. Engineers ran final simulations on wind, humidity, and sea temperature, mapping the trajectory across the Black Sea. Each coordinate, each approach vector, was calculated to exploit blind spots in the port's air defenses. At 00:20 hours, the first launch sequence began. A deep rumble shook the vehicle as the first missile rose vertically, boosters igniting in a fiery column. Seconds later, the second missile followed, then the third and fourth. Each missile rapidly tilted toward the sea, subsonic speed carrying them just meters above the water. To any distant observer, these were invisible streaks in the night. Yet every meter mattered. The Neptune's flight profile was designed to slip below the radar horizon, turning physics into a tactical advantage. The first target was the Kuban S-400 cluster overlooking Nova Rosisk. From their hilltop positions, the Russian radar operators noticed anomalies on the screens, hundreds of small blips at varying altitudes, converging on the port. Initially, they assumed civilian or routine naval traffic until the dots multiplied and formed arcs, flowing from multiple vectors. Confusion spread in the command shelters. Drone swarms, FP1 and FP2 units had been deployed to coincide with the missile strike, deliberately cluttering radar screens and forcing operators to choose between decoys and reality. The S-400s fired. White streaks pierced the night sky, interceptors exploding mid-air, illuminating the sea in flashes of fire and smoke. Russian operators noted hits, and yet the true danger was below their tracking threshold. The Neptune missiles continued their low-altitude glide, hugging the wave crests, invisible to radars designed for high and medium-altitude threats. Each missile adjusted in real time, minor corrections ensuring it stayed within a corridor invisible to detection systems. The chaos on the screens allowed Ukraine's operators to maintain control over the approach, synchronizing drone decoys with precision timing. By 00:35 hours, the first Hong Neptune reached its S-400 target. A slight nose adjustment, a brief vertical rise, and it plunged directly into the heart of the radar cluster. The explosion was immediate and catastrophic. Fragments shredded surrounding equipment, setting off chain reactions within the launchers. Subsequent Neptune missiles hit remaining S-400 batteries and support infrastructure. Columns of fire erupted on multiple hillsides, the night illuminated by bursts that turned surveillance cameras' feeds into a panorama of destruction. By 00:45 hours, at least 4 S-400 launchers were obliterated, their radars rendered blind, their myth of invulnerability shattered. With the air defenses incapacitated, attention shifted to the port itself. The Shashari's terminal, a sprawling complex of pumps, tanks, and container yards, became the next focus. Neptune missiles targeted heat signatures from command centers and storage tanks. Explosions cascaded, sending fire spiraling through pipelines and tank clusters. Automated emergency systems struggled to respond. Many were offline due to prior hits. Drone swarms maneuvered overhead, surveying, confirming hits, and searching for intact infrastructure. Some UAVs even landed atop key facilities, triggering localized demolitions or secondary fires. As dawn approached, Russian forces scrambled to regain control. FP1 and FP2 drone swarms remained airborne, constantly adjusting formations, dropping decoy signals, and exploiting sensor limitations. Russian Pantsir and Tor batteries fired repeatedly, but with the main threat already having passed, most shots were misdirected, hitting empty sea or expendable decoys. Fuel and ammunition depletion became a strategic problem. The Neptune missiles and drones had done their work efficiently, leaving minimal resistance for the next phase of operations. Meanwhile, inside the port command centers, confusion turned to panic. Operators misidentified targets, miscalculated distances, and struggled to track the remaining drones. Infrared imagery, normally reliable, was overwhelmed by smoke, fire, and heat from multiple explosions. Russian narratives of control dissolved into chaos as emergency protocols failed to contain cascading failures. Thermal and radar sensors, once trusted, had become a trap. Every delay allowed more drones and missiles to approach unopposed, further eroding defensive capacity. By 0500 hours, the first Neptune had already struck its final target at the Shashari's pump station, detonating directly above the main manifold. The shockwave destroyed the control room, damaged power distribution, and sent pipelines into critical failure. Secondary explosions consumed adjacent tanks, flames reflecting across the Gulf, visible for kilometers. The fourth missile completed the terminal strike seconds later, targeting full storage tanks, igniting fires that would continue for hours. At this point, Nova Rosisk was effectively crippled, its multi-billion-dollar infrastructure under fire from multiple vectors. The chaos spread deeper into the port. Container yards, warehouses, and logistics centers became the focus of precision drone strikes. FP1 units moved in low and fast, evading visual and radar detection, landing small explosive charges on critical cranes and supply nodes. The combination of missile strikes and UAVs created overlapping waves of destruction. Russian personnel struggled to differentiate real targets from decoys, their radars cluttered, thermal cameras confused by fire and smoke rising from multiple points simultaneously. The fog over the Gulf, already thick in the early morning, amplified the confusion. Thermal sensors, relying on temperature contrasts, began misidentifying heat sources. Drone operators exploited this, deliberately creating false hotspots with small incendiary devices on empty docks. Smoke, fire, and mirrors of heat created an artificial battlefield, forcing Russian operators to react reflexively rather than strategically. By 0530 hours, most S-400 and short-range batteries were firing at phantom targets, wasting precious ammunition and time. From the southern approaches, 2 additional long Neptune missiles were launched to complete the disruption of the port's core facilities. These missiles carried identical payloads of 249 kilograms, intended for the remaining critical infrastructure. One targeted the central power distribution hub, the other, the main fuel pumping station. Both flew at a few meters above the water, following pre-calculated wave-skimming trajectories that avoided radar detection until the final seconds. Russian operators only glimpsed them as faint blips when they were within 20 kilometers of the coast. The central power hub was hit at 0547 hours. Explosions erupted, knocking out electricity across the northern and western sections of the port. Automated cranes stopped mid-operation, lighting systems failed, and surveillance cameras went dark. Nova Rosisk was no longer merely vulnerable, it was temporarily incapacitated. During this window, FP2 drones executed coordinated reconnaissance. Some were programmed to simulate additional attack vectors, flying in arcs that suggested simultaneous strikes elsewhere. Russian defensive operators, still attempting to assess the situation, were misled into over-prioritizing the wrong targets, allowing the main strikes to proceed unhindered. At 0600 hours, Russian naval patrols attempted to respond. Patrol boats accelerated towards suspected targets, but the coordinated timing of drone and missile strikes ensured they were already misaligned. FP1 decoys emitted radar signatures similar to armed drones, luring vessels away from real threat vectors. Helicopters launched late, only to encounter false signatures and expend their limited fuel-chasing decoy formations. Every tactical move by the Russians was anticipated, planned for, and neutralized by Ukrainian operators, monitoring in real time. The Shashari's terminal suffered fire and structural damage across multiple facilities. Even with partial emergency protocols activated, firefighting and containment teams were overwhelmed, hampered by limited visibility and ongoing drone harassment. Meanwhile, The remaining Neptune missiles continued to fly across the Black Sea, subsonic, sea-skimming, and guided by a combination of inertial navigation and preloaded visual waypoints. They avoided Russian jamming efforts. The atmospheric conditions, including a slight temperature inversion over the Gulf, caused radar beams to bend upward, further concealing the incoming missiles. Operators at Nova Rosisk could not rely solely on electronic tracking. Each second that passed allowed the missiles to approach the port with minimal interference. At 0630 hours, the third long Neptune reached the northern fuel storage cluster. Its infrared seeker identified the hottest points, scanning for operational tanks. In the final moments of its descent, the missile adjusted its course and plunged into the largest storage tank. Thermal images captured by Ukrainian drones showed the fuel spreading in bright ribbons across the port, feeding the growing inferno. Firefighting systems were either offline or overwhelmed. The fourth Neptune was no less devastating. Targeting the southern pumping station, it descended at a steep angle and detonated directly above the manifold. Pipelines ruptured instantly, control systems were destroyed, and flames leapt into the early morning sky. Smoke obscured the surrounding infrastructure, reducing visibility for Russian countermeasures and forcing operators to rely on incomplete sensor data. Every second of confusion ensured that follow-up drone and missile waves would face minimal resistance. Nova Rosisk was effectively neutralized. The S-400 batteries were destroyed or blind, power and fuel distribution networks were crippled, and container yards were on fire. Drone swarms continued to survey and engage secondary targets, confirming the destruction and searching for untouched assets. FP1 and FP2 units moved unpredictably, some landing small charges on secondary infrastructure, others simulating additional attacks, maintaining the psychological and operational pressure on Russian forces. Russian attempts at organized retaliation were largely ineffective. Patrol boats were misdirected by decoys, helicopters exhausted fuel chasing phantom targets, and radar systems were overwhelmed by a combination of environmental conditions and deliberate drone interference. By 0700 hours, any coordinated defense had effectively ceased. The Neptune missiles and accompanying UAV strikes had completed their objectives with precision, demonstrating that even the most heavily fortified port in the region could be penetrated under the right conditions and timing. At 0715 hours, the aftermath was still unfolding. FP1 drones continued low-level reconnaissance, recording damage and transmitting live telemetry back to Ukrainian operators. The port was paralyzed, every access point either engulfed in fire or blocked by wreckage. Amid the chaos, Russian personnel scrambled to identify what had happened. Communications were degraded, radar systems partially disabled, and thermal imaging sensors confused by smoke and heat. Emergency protocols were initiated, but without guidance from operational radar and S-400 coverage, responses were fragmented and ineffective. Every delay allowed Ukrainian forces to maintain control of the operational tempo. Secondary explosions erupted across container yards. FP2 drones had deliberately triggered charges on crane structures, fueling structural collapses that prevented rapid salvage or movement of cargo. The coordinated timing meant that fire crews could not isolate one section without risking additional detonations elsewhere. Russian attempts to contain the fires were further delayed by the continued presence of low-flying drones, which created a psychological barrier to ground intervention. Ukrainian operators exploited environmental factors to full advantage. Morning fog and residual smoke reduced visibility to less than 500 meters in some areas. Missiles and drones that remained in operation were virtually undetectable until they were in close proximity, ensuring that final strikes could be executed without interference. By 0745 hours, reports indicated that the fuel and power sectors were completely inoperative. Fires raged across multiple locations, with secondary explosions continuing to punctuate the landscape. Drone swarms moved in predictable patterns to maximize coverage, while some units simulated additional attack vectors, creating uncertainty about the number of operational threats. Russian command structures struggled to prioritize targets, as decoy UAVs deliberately emitted radar and infrared signatures mimicking fully armed drones. FP1 units performed final sweeps, ensuring that any remaining operational facilities were identified and targeted with small, precise charges. Satellite imagery from this time would later confirm widespread devastation, revealing structural damage consistent with multiple simultaneous strikes rather than isolated incidents. The strategic impact was immediate. Nova Rosisk's operational capabilities were neutralized for hours, with key storage and transfer points destroyed. Russian naval forces, deprived of air cover and early warning data, were unable to respond effectively. The decoy drones had succeeded in luring patrols and helicopters away, while Neptune missiles delivered concentrated destructive power at precise locations. By exploiting radar limitations, environmental conditions, and the coordinated timing of UAVs, Ukraine achieved a high-value strike without exposing personnel to direct counterattack. Russian attempts to regain control were largely symbolic. Patrol boats had returned to Nova Rosisk, but they were unable to navigate safely through debris-laden waters. Firefighting units faced continuous explosions from residual fuel fires, while command centers operated with severely degraded communications. Drone swarms maintained overwatch, deterring re-entry into key sections of the port and preventing rapid restoration. Throughout the operation, Ukrainian precision had exploited multiple layers of Russian defense simultaneously. Missile strikes at S-400 batteries eliminated early warning capacity. Low-flying, wave-skimming trajectories avoided radar detection. FP1 and FP2 drones created visual, thermal, and radar clutter. By 0830 hours, the port remained engulfed in fire and smoke. Nearest defensive positions were misaligned due to decoy operations. Patrols were fatigued, and remaining helicopters were low on fuel. Nova Rosisk, valued at over $10 billion, had effectively been neutralized for several hours, demonstrating the capability of coordinated drone and missile operations to penetrate heavily fortified targets. Initial assessments of damage became clear. 4 S-400 launchers destroyed, radar arrays neutralized, fuel distribution networks incapacitated, and container yard infrastructure extensively damaged. Neptune missiles had successfully hit priority targets with minimal deviation. Smoke, fire, and explosions continued to dominate the landscape, while drone swarms maintained unpredictable movement patterns overhead. Russian countermeasures were ineffective due to depleted fuel, misaligned assets, and a failure to anticipate the coordination between missile and drone strikes. By 0930 hours, the operation had achieved full strategic impact. Nova Rosisk, previously considered one of the most secure ports in the region, was neutralized. The port's incapacitation demonstrated the potential of integrated drone and missile tactics against high-value targets. FP1 and FP2 UAVs ensured continuous pressure, preventing immediate restoration, while Neptune missiles executed high-damage strikes on S-400 batteries and critical fuel and power infrastructure. Russian forces, despite numerical and technological superiority, were unable to counter the operation effectively due to misdirected responses, radar overload, and environmental factors.